first question. But I do want to set the tone for this little workshop, because it should be a workshop. I want this to be question-driven. And everybody here has questions about soil and this and that. And so I'm just going to have a kind of a loose framework, and I want this to be question-driven, and we can solve interesting problems you might have on the land. The first thing I need to tell you, though, I don't garden at all. I'm a soil scientist, but I work in a wildland setting. I'm actually a soil scientist and restoration ecologist. I fix broken things. So I'm out there all the time looking at toxic soils, broken soils of this and that, broken ecosystems. We do a lot of stream restoration, forest restoration, placer mine restoration. So that's my background, is really focused on how to fix broken things, especially in the ecosystem. So those kind of questions will be especially pertinent. Don't ask me what nutrients go into carrots, because I have no idea. So this is going to be an overarching soils thing, but not your typical soils intro stuff, because we're going to concentrate on biophysics, which is kind of a weird term. Let me read you something that was written 2,000 years ago. This is something Plato wrote 2,000 years ago. And the reason I like this little quote here is because it's very true as to what's happening today, at least the way I see it on a landscape scale. And it's not just me. Here's what Plato wrote. What remains of our once rich land is like the body of a sick man, with the fat and soft earth having wasted away, and only the bare skeleton remaining. Years ago, many of the mountains were arable. The valleys were full of rich soil that are now marshes. Hills that were once covered with forest and produced abundant pasture are now produce only food for bees. Read knapweed. Once the land was enriched by annual rains that were not lost as they are now by flowing from the bare soil to the sea. Once the soil was deep, it absorbed and kept the water, and this water soaked into the hills and fed springs and running streams everywhere. Now, abandoned shrines at these dried up springs attest that our description of the land is true. Amazing. He wrote that 2,000 years ago as he watched his country degrade the soil resource, and now we're seeing the very same thing here. And that's what the whole crux of this little workshop is about, is how water gets into the soil and what holds it there. What happened to Plato and his ecosystem a long time ago was a breakdown of the water-stable aggregates. You don't see that in the news very often, do you? But it's way more important than global warming. Global warming has nothing on what's going on in our ecosystems right now. And that, if I can get on a little soapbox, it really torques me off that everyone's focused on the wrong thing right now. Because our soil resource is going downhill fast while everyone's staring at the big global warming. So don't get too bound up in all that. As I mentioned there, I've got a few of these handouts, but not near enough to cover this crowd. We are losing our landscape ability to hold water. And it's basically due to three things, three big picture items. One is compaction. You all know what compaction is, when you roll over the soil and it heats it up and takes the soil structure out of it. The other is road systems. Road systems act like gutters. When the rain comes down, gutters it right off and makes it fly right down the road. And then the other is lack of soil organic matter. So those three things. And oddly, we can do something about almost all those things. So that's cool in a wildland setting. A lot of times in a landscape scale, you don't think you can do anything. We can actually do stuff about all three of those things. So when I say what this all has to do with what I call the watershed death spiral, and it's what we're seeing in western Montana. I don't know about the rest of the country, but here's what we're seeing here. Our watersheds are getting pretty beat up top and throughout, and we've got compaction everywhere from tractor logging and other kind of logging. We've got loss of organic matter from poor forest practices and poor agricultural practices, and we've got road systems up the Jesus. So the rain comes down, the precip comes down, the snowmelt comes down. It doesn't soak into the soil like it used to. And it washes off in one big gulp in the spring. And we're seeing this time and time again. Those of us who work in the field are seeing it increase every year. Not with an increase in precip. We're seeing bigger floods with even less precip. So you got to start thinking, what the hell's going on here? So we're getting these big floods, these high energy things, and the streams are getting choked with sediments. Now, when I say sediments, it's not what you think of as, you know, maybe sand, silt, clay. It's cobble, it's rock, it's big stuff. And it comes down, it chokes these channels. We're losing depth, we're gaining width. The banks are breaking down because there's no veg on them anymore. So it gets wider and wider until it actually subs out and the stream actually disappears. And I can point to probably 15 streams that I've seen disappear in western Montana in the last 20 years. So you should be scared. This should scare the heck out of you. It's amazing what's going on out there. But again, it's all reversible on a long, long time frame. Any questions about this stuff? Have you seen it? Anybody seen this stuff? See a few heads bobbing up there. Where have you seen it?
Dearborn.
Yeah, the Dearborn's a classic example. People think that Dearborn is pristine, but us who recognize disturbance go out there and that's a train wreck, just a train wreck.
North Central Washington, that's not, cattle are a big part of the...
Cattle are huge. They do all the things we were talking about. They take out the organic matter, they compact, they break down banks. Yeah, so.
All over the tropics, especially where you have ultra-solid, eco-solid soils that are only 2 inches deep and a lack of organic matter. Yeah, I've also seen dozens of streams and springs even disappear.
Yep, the springs is what really worries me because you know, where we used to go get water, pure water, good clean drinking water, those things are gone now. So, geez, water's kind of important. All right. And then the one thing I want to talk to you folks a little bit about is water stable aggregates. Anybody know what that is? It's probably the most important biophysical process there is right now. It's been this way forever. You all know what soil is. Soil is a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, and different combinations. Does anyone here know how to do soil texturing? You ever do that? We could just do a little demo here.
Where you wet it and
Yeah.
you do the ribbon test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has everyone done that?
Like a litmus test?
No, this is kind of a neat test. It's a skill that you should have, actually. If you're going to be working with soil, you need to know the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. I've got a little bit of soil here, and I'll tell you what, I'll build a ribbon, or a couple of ribbons, because that's the art, is building the right kind of ribbon. And we'll pass this around. We could have a few people doing it. We'll probably be a good volunteer. You want to do it? Yeah. All right. This is fresh. This has worms in it. There's a piece for you. Now what we're going to do is, we're going to add water to this very slowly and squish it up. This is pretty moist stuff. I got this from outside here where they keep everything nice and moist. And you can learn a lot from doing this little test. You learn what kind of rocks are in it, how much organic matter. Organic matter is easy. How much does it stay in your hands? This is probably over 4 or 5% right here, and maybe 3 or 4%.
Is that good?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that percentage is like a garden soil is right around 5 to 6, something like that. According to me, who doesn't know much about gardening.
So you're saying the more you stay in your hands, the more organic matter that's in the
Yeah.
soil?
Yep. The organic matter in the soil, this humic stuff here, is it's a really unique molecule, and it's something that we all strive to build. That's why we do composting and all the rest of it. And it's such a complex molecule that we can't even describe it. And the big thing about it is it has a negative charge, electric charge, which means it can hold nutrients. Most nutrients have a positive charge. So the more things you have in the soil with a negative charge, the better.
You said organic matter is negative?
Yep, humus is negative. Matter of fact, this soil, if you put, because this has a lot of organics in it, if you put acid on here, probably about 10% HCl on here, it would neutralize it immediately. And it would keep neutralizing it for quite a while. So organic matter, and humus especially, can neutralize pH to our benefit. Something to know. All right, let me see how yours is going there. Oh yeah, that's just right. So, here's how you do this. You just feed it through your finger. Common width, common depth is the most important thing. Look at that. And then you expose it to gravity and see where it breaks. This is about 1.5 inches, and that's what we're trying to measure. Yours is a little shorter. Oh, you need practice. Yeah. And I do this about 3 times. About 3 times. And then see what it gets to every time. Oh, I'm going to get a bigger ribbon this time. Oh, it's still about there. About 1 inch, 1.5 inches. And you want to measure, you actually want to measure these things. Yeah, less than 2 inches. Yeah. And I'm going to have you go through this little chart. Is yours about the same? Oh, yeah. Yeah, 1.5 inches. Yep. Yeah, it's about the same. Now you're getting it. And you have to really practice with this. I once had a job because I could do this, but this is no big skill. But the Forest Circus hired me to travel across the absorbent mountains. And I was to do soil texturing about every quarter mile, all the way through the absorptions. Boy, was that fun. Yeah, we spent 3 months doing this. And they paid me for it, and I just laughed because every single one of them was a silty loam. I could have told them that from space, but I didn't. Far be it for me to ruin my vacation. Yeah. All right. In my little handout here, which is available electronically, or I'll make it available to everybody if you want, is a neat little chart. This is a little flow chart that shows me where the soils are at, or what kind of soil it is, the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. So I want you to start me through here and ask me the right questions. Go.
How long before breaking?
Yes.
Excessively wet. Excessively wet, a small touch of soil in the palm of hand and rub it with forefinger.
All right. Here's how you do that. This is the sand test. So we know what column we're in on there. We know what's this one called? Probably clay loam. Yeah. We're in the clay loam column, and so now we're going to figure out which kind of clay loam it is. So you take a little pinch of this soil here, put it in the palm of your hand. It's about that much. And you take a gander at it and you look at the volume of this soil, because we're going to figure out the percentage of sand. And you can do it rather accurately with your eye. Yeah. Okay, put it in the palm of your hand and we're going to flood it just like that. Just flood the heck out of it. And you push it around with your finger, and then you're going to get a feel for it. And you're going to say to yourself,
Does the soil feel very gritty?
kind of does, a little bit. Yeah. I'm going to say it feels great. You agree? It's fine with it.
Yeah, there's a lot that's going into solutions.
Yeah, and that's another, and so what I do is I pour the water off and I look at what's left. And then you can kind of tell, actually, like this looks to me like about, it might be 30% sand. Yeah.
So it's a sandy clay loam.
Sandy clay loam. What do we know about sandy clay loams? They're great.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. It's got sand, it's got clay, it's got silt. Now, hand me that thing. So now we know this is a sandy clay loam. That's a neat thing to know. So what the heck does that mean? We go.
And what exactly is loam?
A sandy clay, a loam means kind of a combination of things. Yeah, but it specifically means these specific combinations that are on this next chart. You guys remember this from college, this soil texture triangle, this awful, complicated, ridiculous thing? It takes some getting used to, but you can actually figure some stuff out with this. It took me years to figure this out. Well, all right, minutes. Each axis on this triangle is a different element of sand, silt, and clay. And so we know that we're a sandy clay loam, and then it's divided up into these things. Sandy clay loam, right there. Bam. And then it's bounded on 3 sides by these 3 different arrows, so I can tell you the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. That soil we have has from 50 to 80% sand. It's got from 20 to 30% clay, and it's got from 0 to 20% silt. So it's a pretty well balanced soil. It's pretty nice. And that's what this will tell you. Now, that's fun and all. Sand, silt, clay, we got it down. Sandy clay loam. What do we know about sandy clay loam? Because it has so much sand in it.
Not nutritious.
Well, it can be. It can have a lot of
Good
nutrients in
drainage.
it with the clay and whatnot, because it has clay.
Good drainage. Good drainage.
Drains. It should drain pretty well. Yeah. Yeah, it should drain pretty well. But
It'll hold roots.
it'll hold roots. It'll also, not only will it drain, but it'll also hold water well too. This stuff, it feels like it's in a pretty good.
Because of the clay.
Yep, because of the clay. A little clay goes a long way. Now, let's talk about what sand, silt, and clay is. You all know what sand is, right? Broken down rocks. What's silt?
Organic matter.
Particles bigger than clay.
Yep, it's also broken down rocks. It's just powdered rocks.
Glaciated, sort of crushed, high pressure.
It's just beat up until it's a very small particle, but it's like flower sized. Yep, it's pulverized. So sand is broken down rocks. Silt is broken down rocks. Clay, what's clay?
Down rocks.
No, clay is different. Clay is where the magic happens. It's weird stuff. Clay is actually the broken down rocks, the silt, that has been chemically decomposed and then recrystallized. Clay is actually a crystal, so it comes apart in the water solution and then it comes back together as clay. And so clay is think of it as a crystal. And that means it has, and it's not only a crystal, it's a lattice. It's a very strange critter. It actually has surface area beyond belief, and water can get inside of the particle, and water can be on the outside of it, and it has a negative charge, so it holds on to nutrients as well. So clay is really different stuff, and it can be put in the water solution, and it can actually drop down through the soil column because it can be dissolved like that. So everybody got that? Sand, silt, and clay. All right. Yeah.
So if you were to look at clay through a microscope, it would be kind of like a jaggy thing with lots of surface
No,
area on it?
they
Or just-
describe clay under a microscope as looking like a sandwich. Yeah, with exterior spaces and interior spaces, all with electric charges to them. And it's an electron microscope. You have to look at it through.
Are they kind of porous, or they're just constructed so that there's lots of space for water?
Yeah, lots of space in it.
Oh, they're plates, okay.
Yeah, it's like plates, like a stack of plates.
Kind of pencil then.
Yeah, it's very odd, that stuff.
Okay.
People will inject the bentonite clay, and because of all those pockets, it can absorb just a crazy amount of stuff in your body, even when the particle is really small, because of all those little pockets.
People eat bentonite? Only this crowd would know that. Don't eat bentonite. Yeah. Now, what do we know about biochar in this room? I don't know anything about biochar myself. Do people use it? You use it back there, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, and I've always wondered about biochar. Does it have an electric charge? We're just talking about charcoal.
It actually has pretty good cation exchange capacity, but it also has a lot of positive charges on the surface too. It's a graphene crystalline structure, so it's not a full graphite carbon structure, so there's a lot of complexity.
Right.
It reduces soil bulk density, increases water holding capacity, but what I have learned is that even with mushroom compost and biochar, you really still have to focus on your humates.
Right.
It will enhance humates, but it will.
So we're talking about water stable aggregates?
Yep.
What are they?
We're getting there next.
Oh.
Okay, and that's the crux of all this, water-stable aggregates. Water-stable aggregates are simply sand, silt, and clay that are glued together by organic material, mostly fungal goo or glue, whatever you want to call it. So, water-stable aggregates are just, remember that, sand, silt, and clay glommed together. And that's all there is to it. Now, the cool thing is, when you do get aggregates, let's say this is an aggregate of sand, silt, clay, in a water-stable fashion. Here's another aggregate over here What you got in between is space, and that's cool. What people need to know is that plants need soil oxygen almost as much as they need water.
Isn't soil anaerobic
No,
in general? It's not?
nope, nope. The better a soil breathes, the better. The more oxygen, the more gas exchange you can provide, the better. Yep.
So you're talking about the components of soil. There's not really any nutrients in any of those three things,
Oh,
right?
there is.
There is?
Yeah, in the clay, it can hold nutrients.
Minerals or nutrients?
Mineralized nutrients.
I guess.
Yeah, yeah, plant available
But
nutrients.
you need to have organic matter to grow stuff, right?
You don't really. You don't really need organic matter to grow stuff. It's great if you do, because that's where all the action is. That's where things are recycled. But you can grow stuff if you want to in just a dead soil. It just has to have a little bit of nutrient that you get.
Water or something.
Yeah, yeah.
I had the opportunity of planting the last one on Mount St. Helens. We were like just on a moonscape of, we called it popcorn. It was
Yep.
welded tough. So I mean, here you got pure mineral that it had the advantage of soaking up water like a sponge and reflecting heat because it was white basically, or light gray. But it had no organic material in it at all. But everything you planted in there went nuts.
Yep.
I mean, it's like you had like 3-4 years of tree growth. You know, when you planted a tree in a single season.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Is there a lot of carbon or phosphorus in that stuff?
Whatever the mountain blew out.
Yeah. When a mountain blasts like that, you get a whole lot of plant available nutrients right away because of the fine particulates, and then water mixed with that. If that happened in a desert situation, it would be completely different. But here in the Pacific Northwest, it's that way. So water stable aggregates, sand, silt, and clay glom together, air spaces in between. I think I have a picture of that here somewhere. There's a picture of it.
So can they expand and contract?
They can. They do. That is a great question. Here's a drawing someone did with the water stable aggregates, you know, with the roots going through there and the different critters in there. And the air, remember that oxygen, the gas exchange is huge. Whenever you have a trail or a compacted zone, what do you think is killing the plants there? It could be mechanical tractors smashing the plant, but most of the time, it's because of the gas exchange that things don't grow in. The lack of gas exchanges. And that's really important to recognize, is that you need air going in and out of there quick.
What about on this, like in logging is like, you know, on our place, like in the loggings there, you can see right where the processors went and stuff like that, and they just have this massive dog hair in there. So it was actually growing gobs of stuff, but they weren't getting very far.
Right. The reason you see lots of trees in skid trails is not because of the compaction. It's actually due to substrate, germination substrate. So when the machines went through there, they brought up a bunch of mineral soil, and the seeds can germinate in that much better than they can in something with organics mixed. And believe it or not, sometimes compaction can actually increase water holding capacity. And that's a weird thing to recognize. And we use that trick. That's a trick you can use. If you've got a really cobbly soil, and I mean super cobbly, lots of sand and gravel in it, slight compaction can actually increase water holding capacity because it takes all those big pores and it makes them small. Big pores lose water to gravity. Small pores hold on to water due to capillary action. So that's an important thing to know. We use that in placer mine restoration all the time. Something can't hold water, we'll drive a dozer over it until it will. Yeah. Weird, huh?
Does not at the same time cut down your gas exchange?
It does, but in a real cobbly soil, it still has plenty. But you're right, we got to watch out because you can overdo it, especially the vibration of a cat. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions about that? Yeah.
I live in Hot Springs, and it's the most challenged soil I've ever worked. And closer to town, it's not bad, and it's not for a long discussion, but it's, and Skeeter's kind of going, oh my God, what did I move to? But out of town, the soil is so unbelievable, it's so high alkaline, and it's just, it is such a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we call tough luck. Who'd want to farm that? I mean, really. Rick, you probably know all about that stuff.
He does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alkaline seep, yeah, saline seep.
Yeah. Yeah, stay clear of those. Permaculture people should grab the best bottom lines they can.
Well, see, that's what's keeping property prices down in Hot Springs, because it's just not that popular.
See, it's great.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and there's probably some unique things in there. So back to the soil biophysics and the water stable aggregates and why it's so important. Those things, those little aggregates are not only created by biologic activity, mostly by fungi and different kinds of fungi. I don't think we'll go into it too much. But the glue in those fungi going through the soil and doing their thing make the aggregates. Now what you got to realize is that when fungi goes through, you know, there's two basic kinds of fungi in the world, real simply put. There's the mycorrhizal fungi, which has an association with a plant, and then there's decomposing fungi. And both of them can do water stable aggregates. They can both create aggregates. But they're both reliant on biologic activity. So if you pull the plants out or you pull the carbon out of the soil for some reason, those water stable aggregates actually disappear. They need maintenance, constant maintenance. So you can kill a soil by taking the life out of it. And then when you don't have those aggregates, it does what I call, it turns to pudding. Water hits it, it collapses, and it actually stops the gas exchange and some of the infiltration rate as well. So it's really important for soils to keep them alive. They're a living thing anyway. And recognizing that is super important. So keep the carbon in there and keep the plants there. Otherwise it will die and it'll collapse and you'll have nothing there. And it's amazing how that happens. Yeah.
You mean like when you say like you pull a plant out of the ground, is that what you're referring to?
For a mycorrhizal plant, yeah. You'll be taking the mycorrhiza with it. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'm talking denuding things. Like for example, and if you were to scrape the active layer off, you know, the water stable aggregates are what you take them with. But a roadway is a good example, things like that. Roadways are, and you can actually create, people ask me, how long does it take to create water stable aggregates? I can tell you. There's not very many people who have actually measured this, and sadly I'm one of them. Here's the experiment we did. We did some bad logging up at Blue Breath. We did it on purpose. We took a tractor in there, we mashed things around, we crushed the soil, we scraped off the organic matter, we burned the hell out of it. It was a mess. It was your typical logging show that we see in Montana. It was just typical. And so I measured the water stable aggregates, and how do you measure water stable aggregates, you might ask? It's pretty easy. I did it in a lab under different situations, but you can take a spoonful of soil, dry soil like this, soak it in here, shake it around, and see if it turns to pudding without any texture to it, or does it stand up and have grain to it. That's all it takes. So we did all this horrible logging, measured this aggregates. They were dead. They were dead. And then I put organic matter on there, trying to re-bootstrap the ecosystem there, the soil ecosystem. And it took about 3 growing seasons, or what I should say, decomposition seasons, to create water stable aggregates in a good way. And you've all done this. You've all done this in your gardens. You've seen a nasty soil that would just turn to pudding when you put water with it. And then after years of adding compost and whatnot, you're going to see those aggregates and they're just going to stand up. You can put them under water, shake them around, and they stay in their form. And that's what's important about it. You've all done it and didn't know it from.
Would you use for organic matter?
I use slash, logging slash. That's all I used. Yeah.
Did you chip it?
I didn't. Actually, I did do a few plots of chipping. Chipping works phenomenally well to create water stable aggregates. Yeah, chips lying on the ground work really, really well. Yeah, you
You were just top dressing, right?
Yep.
And so you could do a large area, you could actually modify a fairly large area in a short period of time.
Yes, you sure can. And because we learned this stuff, we're starting to use just slash to do soil amelioration all over the place. Not only to build water stable aggregates, but get this. What did I say was one of our biggest problems on the landscape? Compaction. Compaction, not allowing water to get into the soil and also killing the gas exchange. Compaction is a huge, huge issue. Very, very difficult to detect. I have a compaction detector, and it's a secret weapon. I'm going to show it to you. Don't steal my idea. No, I'm kidding. Steal away. Ugh. This is my box of tricks. If you guys want to tear this apart later on, that'd be fine. Here it is. called a poker doodle. No, it's not really called that. You know, it's called my resistance to penetration-ometer. It's got a lot of names. But what is this really? It's a stick with a little rod on the end. These come from file cabinets. And, yeah. And but these happen to be the right width and the right length to do a soil survey. And it takes a long time to get used to this, but you just poke it in the ground about every 18 inches. Boom, boom, boom. So what happened to me, and the reason I figured out that slash can decompact a soil, and that's important to know. I had this silly job of doing a road survey, and I walked 65 miles poking this in the ground every 18 inches, like this. I should have got a longer rod, because my back hurt. Yeah. And every single time I came to a down log, whoosh, the probe went right in. I'm going like, holy smokes, is that just coincidence? Of course not. It was the biologic activity associated with that log that decompacted the soil. And fungi are weird critters. Fungi, well, they're more closely related to animals than they are plants. They're more closely related to us. So you vegans and vegetarians out there, think about that next time you and the reason that they're classified more important to, or more closely related to animals is because they eat. They actually eat. They find food and they go after it, and they eat in a very different way, but they eat carbon just like we do, and they forage. And so if you put a log on the surface of a trail that's compacted, they will bust up through that compacted dirt, grab that carbon, and bring it to death. They're very aggressive. Yeah.
Taxonomically, the real difference is that they have nuclear membrane.
Yeah.
It's periodic.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so how far out from the log does that affect?
That is a really good question. Let's say this is the log, about that far, about 1.5 inches on either side. Yeah. So not that much, but it's still, that's something. Yeah.
How deep do you go with those probes?
As deep as I can push them. Yeah. You'll usually find the compactions worse. The first 3 inches usually not so bad, and then below 3 inches a lot more. And that's because of biologic activity in that first 3 inches. They fluffs the soil up.
Well, if you get some recent logs on the ground, is it better for branches? Is it better to try to burn so they decompose?
Nope. Leave them set.
Just let it sit.
Yep.
Even though it may take a long time.
Yeah. Well, let me address her long time question, compaction and time. What we found, because we've been doing a lot of research since we figured out that slash decompacts things, we started actually looking at the recovery rates on skid trails after you put slash down. And your normal skid trail, and let's say fine soils get compacted a lot easier. Let's say a fine soil got compacted by a dozer 80 years ago. It is still compact today. So, and not near as much, but it recovered. But about 80 years is what it takes for compaction to recover. Now, with biologic activity and logs and stuff, it takes less than 20 years. So it really cuts it down. But everything we're talking about takes a long time. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess my only question was, you put the slash down, you don't add any mycelium to the slash.
No, you don't have to do that.
You want it to go up from the ground
Exactly.
to help with compaction as opposed to
Everywhere.
Yeah, but the cool thing, you can add, you can spore these things, the slash, and the reason is, not only do fungi, they'll go up to get carbon, but let's say they're up there in the carbon source, they'll go down to get water. They'll go over there to get nitrogen. They're all over the place. They're grabbing different things. It's like they're at the Orange Street food farm. Yeah.
So you don't incorporate it?
No, you don't want to incorporate it. You just lay it right on top. Yeah.
Now, what if you just run over it with a cat with rippers? Does that just make it worse? Or?
Okay, there's 3 ways to get rid of compaction. Mechanical ripping is the big one. They do that a lot. So mechanical ripping will get rid of compaction. It's not good for the soil at all. The second is a natural way, and that's wet, dry, freeze, thaw events. So you can actually get rid of compaction just by freeze, thaw, wet, dry. It breaks up the compaction. And then the third one is the one we're all interested in, biologic activity. And that's the one that really does the job. It really makes it pop.
So I saw that list of 3 in your handout, and
Would you count in like taprooted cover crops to be in the biological
You betcha.
activity?
Yep, if it has plants, you bet. Yeah, that's biological activity. Yeah.
I was just like getting firewood and, for instance, they've been thinning the forest, and you've got your typical slash piles periodically staggered with, that'll be burned in the winter.
Yeah.
A better approach, are you saying, is to, rather than collect the slash into piles and burning it for distribution on the surface?
Yep.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, that is a better approach, without a doubt.
Why?
What we're doing, why don't they do that?
Yeah.
They're all scared of fire. Fire hazard
Oh, yeah.
reduction. And so, but it's an awful, awful thing. Fire hazard reduction around structures and whatnot, that's okay. But when you start removing slash forest-wide and landscape-wide, boy, we're gonna get into trouble.
Well, that's a huge process, because it seems to be the standard operating procedure for all of the private
How about
logging.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the lazier you are with your slash, the better. Yeah. But slash management is something I kind of specialize in, and there are things that will get you into trouble. So don't go out there and put slash in the ground everywhere. For example, never put pine slash under pines, except in February, and that's because of bugs, insects. You don't want certain insects to get into that green slash, produce a brood, and go to the nearest trees.
Mm.
So there's a lot to slash management, but I am a big proponent of what we call lop and scatter, and they don't do it because the fire fuels people have taken control of forest stewardship, and they are not doing us any favors.
Smokey the Bear.
Yeah, it's killing things, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Back in the 80s when I was working in the woods, planting trees in Oregon, and they were like, you know, it was the days of the clear cut where they would take everything off, burn it bare, which was really wonderful for a tree planter.
Uh-huh.
But it's like, what's left after you burn? It's like, I've seen what's happened on my slash piles. It burns, like, the only thing they grow is thistles for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So, all those millions of trees that we planted, what was happening to the biology of those massive areas?
Believe it or not, they'll probably be okay. The trees themselves, individual plantings, will be okay, but the ecologic impacts on the soil and the greater ecosystem are huge. Huge.
30 years later, there was nothing but trees. I mean,
Yeah.
there was nothing under them.
Conifers are amazing. We're lucky here. We are fooled into thinking we're not doing tremendous damage because conifers are very resilient and they're nutrient pirates. They'll go, you know, they're tough plants. So that's something to keep in mind. Just because you see a million trees coming up doesn't mean that things are all okay. Yeah?
In the interface, where I do a lot of my forestry, fuel management's a big deal. And so disposing of slash has been a big deal, and we've done everything from hauling it away to, of course, classic slash burns.
Yeah.
And I found in the interface, the best solution for me has been to, well, I started with the idea of creating a long windrow that resembled a large legacy, fallen legacy. Our legacies, you know, as you know, in the Swan are mostly large.
Yeah.
And what I found is that the chips, you know, a 3-4 foot pile of chips that was maybe 5 foot wide would compact and hold water and become anaerobic, and nothing would really grow. So I started making these like 100-foot long windrows of slash, then chipping about 6 inches to a foot on top of those.
Oh, neat.
Within months, full myceliation, and those things were wet in the middle and end of August.
That's a great technique. I like that.
Really, I recommend anyone.
Because you kind of capped the slash pot.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works.
That's a neat one.
I've got when I do my presentation, I've got 2 photos, you know, before and after, 3 years later. A long row like he's talking about, this high, and then another one, the same 3 years later, this high that's got all covered with the forest floors, taking it back over again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I didn't think it would break down that fast, but it did a good job.
Yeah, and when you people deal with fuels folks, and you will if you have forest land, the decomposition rates in Montana are actually rather high. And you can put down a log, a tree this big around, on the ground and do a lop and scatter technique. You won't be able to find it in 15 years. The connect will grow up and over it. It's pretty much gone. That's not to say some ecosystems like pine, ponderosa pine, where it's a little drier, different story. It'll stick around a lot longer. But where I live, in the Swan and other places, lop and scatter and decomposition is extremely quick. And we have proven that all this removing of wood from the landscape actually increases fire hazard because it dries out the soil. Wood holds water. We all know that. You know that Doodle stuff? Yeah, that's what it does. It holds water. So to remove that stuff is just plain silly. And in the long run, we actually enhance or increase fire hazard and the damage the fire does when it runs through. We commonly do lop and scatter techniques and then wait a year and push a fire through. And the reason is we're working in ecosystems that are fire dependent or fire compatible, I should say. It's easy to run a fire through slash if you do it at the right day, right time of day, the right everything. And we often run fire through with no ill effects. And the better Forest Service burn crews can also do that if they're talented. But we're running into, as you well know, a lack of talent these days in a lot of those sectors. Yeah.
Could you define slash and lop and scatter?
Oh, he wants to define slash?
Well, I have an idea about it.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Well, slash is just debris from a logging activity mostly.
Specifically logging. Does that mean it's burned or it's just?
Well, they do all kinds of stuff with it.
I mean, just slash.
Lop and scatter just means bucking it up until it falls on the ground. I like to see it. Yeah, lop and scatter means keeping it on the ground as low as possible. Yeah, instead of a big pile. Yeah. There's all kinds of slash techniques.
So when you refer to that though, is it assumed that you're like burning that stuff or you're just scattering it and letting nature take care of it?
Lop and scatter, we're just leaving it for
Like
nature.
slash, same
Yeah.
thing, slash is what you lop. The tree that you is the slash, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep, cut a green tree. And the thing to remember about cutting green trees, if you're worried about nutrients, green trees are a good way to go. Especially some nutrients leach out with the first rainstorm. And you'll get a real flush of things like potassium. Potassium is the weirdest nutrient there is because it's not held in tissue. It's floating around a plant all free. So you kill a tree, the water hits it, it goes right out within the first 1 or 2 rains. You had a question, Andrew? Yeah.
So there's this large-scale pasture that I'm working on that has had a lot of detrimental compaction done to it from overgrazing.
Yeah.
And there's 2 particular questions or things that I want to bring up. One is the entire thing, despite it being, having no shade coverage, there's a thin layer of moss that will grow throughout. Is that due to a lack of infiltration?
It is. That's exactly what it's caused by. It's you find that's one of our indicators for disturbance in the woods is moss, especially when you see it in straight lines that look like dozer tracks. Moss grows on that little tiny perched lens of water. So you squish the soil, and it actually increases the water holding capacity at the very surface. And that's it. Yeah.
And then the other thought is when I'm looking at the procedures of decompaction that I want to go forth with, I want to take as much advantage of the freeze-dry cycle as possible, but at the same time, I also want to take as much advantage of how when you mulch it, it increases biological activity. So when I look at them, they almost seem contradictory to do the same thing.
Yep, a little bit. What he's talking about is if you're in a forest setting and you want to chip, I like chipping, it works pretty well. You can put too many chips on. If you're getting over 3 inches of chips, you're going to insulate the soil to where it stays frozen longer. And soil temperature is hugely important for growth. It's one of the, and biologic activity in general. So watch out when you put chips on. But that's all you got to do is just don't put too many on. If you put a skip 2 or 3 inches, that's fine. But you're talking about a grass environment. Yeah, my specialty is forestry, but I know that pastures and grass fields, those decompact pretty well. Of course, take the dang cows out, And you're going to be very surprised at how fast that comes back. Much quicker than a forest ecosystem.
Why is that?
Biologic activity associated with roots. Yeah, and soil mixing organisms. Here's something you guys probably don't know. So, you're in a pasture or a garden, and you dig a hole, and what do you see? You see black soil. It goes down quite a ways. Why don't we see that black soil in a forest?
Because it's in the trees.
What's that?
Because that matters in the trees.
Nope.
Worms.
We said worms. Yeah, kind of. You're on the right track. The critters, soil mixing organisms are the difference. There's very few soil mixing organisms in a forest, and there's tons in a grassland. What's the difference between the two? pH. pH is the difference. So, forest is a little bit acidic. Those soil mixing organisms can't live. You don't see that nice, what we call an A horizon, that organic horizon to depth. You don't see that in the forest. Except where?
Deciduous.
No, because they're acidic as well. Limestone. If you're on limestone parent material, you'll be walking along. If you're in the forest and you're digging holes and you find worms, you're on limestone. And that's the end of that story. Because if the pH, they can live in that neutralized soil there. So in a pasture setting where it's nice and neutrally, you've got a lot more soil mixing organisms. They take the organics to depth. They incorporate it with the humic molecules. That's what's going on there. So it's very rare you'll see a deep, dark, black forest soil except on top of limestone. Yeah?
This pasture is also covered, its dominant plants are crabgrass and knapweed. And when I look at that and I think about the mechanisms that each of those plants are performing, I feel like that to some degree that crabgrass is preventing that deep soil mixture because it seems like it's got that mat of roots at the top that almost wouldn't allow water to infiltrate deeply.
Yep.
Do you feel that?
You betcha. And that's why when a healthy pasture, a healthy grassland has roots that cover every layer. And the diversity of root structure is what makes it work in grassland.
Do you think that's why then knapweed and crabgrass tend to cruise as a pair?
Yeah, it could be. I don't know much about that pasture, but I do know this about knapweed. Here's a good knapweed compaction story. So I was sitting on a porch up not too far from here, and it was in June. The soil was nice, June, moist soil. And I saw a guy driving through the woods, just driving his pickup truck, kind of willy-nilly through the woods. He wasn't doing any damage. He was going to get some firewood or whatnot. And, just driving down there, no big deal. 2 years later, I happened to be sitting on that very same porch, and right where that guy drove, right where he drove, were 2 tracks of knapweed. What the heck? How did that knapweed get there? What do you think? Yeah, the seeds were always there. This guy compacted the soil to where the knapweed, which can deal with that kind of soil, outcompeted the native plants. Yeah. A lot of our knapweed infestations here are due to compaction, because that damn weed can deal with compaction way better than a native plant.
So we need them.
What's that?
So we need the knapweed.
Yeah, we don't really need it. We need to stop compacting stuff.
For the actual soil, once it's there, it's not reducing compaction, it's not doing anything.
Oh no, sure it does stuff. Any biologic activity is better than no biologic activity. Yeah, it is, yeah.
What's another plant that would compete with knapweed, that has knapweed, who would do what the knapweed does, who would keep the knapweed?
It's a good question. Thistles come to mind.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah.
Is chip slash really a big fuels risk?
No, not at all. No, but it's a huge expense and a whole lot of effort. I don't know if you've ever chipped, but it's a bad job. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
For those of us who are chipping and growing foods, would you talk about the different mulching strategies you might recommend to the growers in pasture or garden systems?
Well, now look what you did. You crossed over into growing food. I don't know anything about that. Yeah, but chips are just fine for that stuff. And a lot of people are afraid that the pH will drop with chips, and there's a little bit of truth to that. Mostly pH will drop because of a differentiation of how nutrients are drawn out of the soil. It's all about nutrient take, not really that much about how things decompose. So I don't think you'll have a pH problem with that particular deal. But I would not incorporate the chips into the soil. You guys know about something called the priming effect? When you take carbon or straw and till it in, and all the microorganisms jump on that new carbon source and they take the nitrogen with them. And so they'll steal the nitrogen out of your soil for a couple of years. It's a serious deal, and people make that mistake all the time.
But you can do it intentionally with good results.
You can, intentionally, with
You
good
have to give
results.
it time.
Yep, if you have time and patience and you know what you're up to. Otherwise, you just kind of screw it up. And I actually did this. I had a nice compost pile with just growing hotter than heck, really hot compost pile. And I purposely added just a 1 wheelbarrow of wood chips, stopped it cold. Yep. So don't put wood chips in your pile without an adequate carbon or nitrogen source. If you're going to do that, you need real nitrogen. Yeah.
You talked about not putting pine underneath pine because
Yeah.
of the bug.
Yeah.
With chipping, is there any issue with that if you?
There is.
It would still be a.
There is. Here's why. It's not really brood habitat when it's chipped. It's not habitat at all, but it's the smell. And there's actually cities that ban chipping during certain times of the year because it brings the bugs in. Yeah. And that's a good thing to know. Slash management is really, really important. It's kind of dicey. My people thin pine under pine from late September through February. And that's all. You can lay pine slash under pine in that window of time because it will dry out before spring. And it'll lose its smell usually, and it'll wreck the beetle habitat. So, but the timing is critical. And you don't see that. Not very many crews do that because they're boneheads. And they're actually perpetuating our bug problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Mark, could you speak a little bit to the chip and slash or whatever system on, say, for example, a dry ponderosa pine hillside versus your sort of Swan Valley? I mean, you have very, very different forests there.
And very different results.
Right.
When you chip in a ponderosa forest, you get something weird, or lock and scatter even in a ponderosa forest. It's not as good because it does something weird. It actually petrifies the wood. So you do your slash treatment, the sun comes down, it dries it out really quick, and it actually makes it less amenable to decomposition. And that stuff, those chips will stick around a long time.
Yeah.
I've seen sticks out there, just lay on the surface for 30 years. And I've been walking by the same stick for 30 years, waiting for it to decompose.
Exactly.
And they don't.
So what do you do with these?
Those are usually fire-dependent ecosystems there.
Right.
So those, yeah. So if you and burning in there is good, but I like to broadcast burn myself. Even so, taking down trees, let them set a year, and then burn through it.
So Mount Jumbo, where they're thinning out fuels aggressively right now.
Yeah.
Talk about like what you do relative to that ecosystem versus
well,
one where
they
composition
probably
works.
they probably aren't going to burn up there because they're scared of everything.
Yeah.
And they should be. Boy, you ever have fire get out of hand, you're scared.
I live up there. I don't
Yeah.
want to
But forest restoration in that kind of environment without a follow-up fire is a waste of time. And so they've got to get it on a burn schedule. They've got to sack up and do it. Yeah. But a couple of years down the road.
So do they? So they're currently slash piling and they'll burn slash this winter up there.
Yeah. They'll pile it and burn. And that's in an urban setting though.
Right.
We can't treat all forests like natural forests anymore.
So if you're looking at that same ponderosa pine setting, like out in the east side of the Bitterroot Valley, where you have big tracts of land,
Yeah. Then I do a broadcast burn.
Broadcast.
Yeah. And it's pretty important when you're putting slash down to don't do it evenly. You're going to want gaps in it because when things get out of hand, you want somewhere to make a stand. So we do little jackpot. We spread some here, we'll spread some there. You don't want it even throughout. Yeah. Broadcast burn is there's basically two kinds of burns in the world. Pile burns, where you burn a slash pile. Broadcast burn when you burn a whole mountainside. You may have seen the smoke this week up the Bitterroot. That was me. Did not get on the news. I like it when I don't show up on the news. Yeah.
Is there any books or anything you recommend? Because as I'm listening to you talk to me, it's like where I live up in Northeast Washington, we have everything from like cedar, ponderosa, pine, maple. I mean, it's just ridiculous. The amount. It's amazing. The amount of trees, but there's a lot of restoration that has to happen and things that we want to do with chipping. But it's all seeming much more complicated than I had.
I don't know if
So,
there's,
you know, as far
I
as-
don't know if there is any books on that.
Yeah, I don't think so, I just thought I would ask.
Rick, why haven't we wrote?
I mean, I know Rick, so I can always take his mind, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, get on that, Mark.
Yeah, because these techniques, you know, I was supposed to write a book. This was supposed to be my PhD dissertation, and I didn't do it. So, yeah, that's what I was supposed to do. So, yeah, shame on me. I'm very sorry. I got so tired of school, I couldn't do it. But you know, another good thing to do is just know the foundational stuff. Know a little bit about bugs, know a little bit about soil. A good book for your area, well, I'm not sure where, well, I don't know much about.
Colville.
Oh, Colville, I know that country real well. Matter of fact, we've written a lot of stuff about that.
Okay.
I'll send you our soils reports.
That would be
Yes, same kind of stuff. They're doing some of the worst forestry ever up there. Yeah. It's awful. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just stretching.
Oh, good, yeah.
So what you were saying about ponderosa forest, I had this concept of thinning out a south slope, and it's a really healthy south slope, so I don't want to get a lot of equipment down there. But I thought I could, like, you know, carefully take some of the logs out that could be milled, and then the other stuff, the slashed other stuff, I wanted to lay down and then chip on top of them on contours to try to create water sinks, and then plant brush type stuff in it, like service berries and stuff in there. But you're saying that that may not work on a south slope of ponderosa forest.
Up in your country, it probably will. Your effective precipitation is much better than a lot of places. Yeah, I'd sure try it. Can't hurt. It can't hurt.
Especially on contour.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'd sure try it. Yeah.
You said we could get information, brochure, your handout online?
Yeah.
Is that, how do we do that?
I don't know. I'll ask Skeeter how to do that. I'll give it to him.
We'll find out.
Yeah, he'll give it to you. And you can, I think my email's on there too. If you email me, I'll shoot it right back. So,
What is your email?
it's Mark, M-A-R-K, at watershedconsulting.com. If I knew how to do that, I would.
Well, you know what you can do? You're talking about this handout?
Yeah.
You sent it, or if I found it, this workshop description and everything will be archived on the permaculture website.
Okay.
And I'll just upload it there and it'll always be there.
That'd be great. We could do it that way. Yeah. Yeah,
Just a personal question. We've got, this is Meadow Valley area, but we've got a long private drive. Thistle and Barnaby up and down the drive side. What would chips do if we laid chips down, a chip layer over all of that area? Would that have any effect?
It'll do some good things, but it won't do anything for the thistle. Their thistles are funny, and they're a misunderstood plant. They can poke up through things. They're all connected, so you might kill them in one area, but they're growing somewhere else.
Yeah, we've got the Barnaby's mostly gone. It's mostly thistle now.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but yeah, and I have, the thistle actually goes away after a while. It's kind of a transient species, so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Okay.
Yeah, not a big deal. It went away at my place.
It's the least of my worries right now.
Yeah. How much time do we have? About 9 minutes?
No, about 20 minutes.
Gee whiz, that's a lot. Yeah. Now you know everything I know. That was it. That was it. So.
I have a question about forestry management and forest service management and some of the models they use. So I met a gal who had taken one of your classes before. She had a temporary job with the Forest Service that they were doing all these computer analysis of climate change and the fire hazard with the forest. And so when you were talking about wood being wet, slash or what's typically considered fuel.
Yep.
But if you're looking at that as wet, you wouldn't see that as much as a fuel. Right. So are the Forest Service models getting that information?
They don't include that at all. No.
Okay.
There was a guy who started, it was called, a guy named Jim Brown, who's actually a pretty well-known fuels ecologist. He's a fuels ecologist. And he had a branch of his science called fuel succession. And that dealt with that, but he retired, so they stopped. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a really good question. They don't. Everything that if it's on the ground, they consider it dry and flammable.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure I don't know anything about models either. You know, I stay clear of that stuff, so.
She was in a temporary program and
Yeah,
was a little frustrated with it.
I bet. Yeah. They do a lot of modeling.
Keeps them out of the way.
It does. Keeps them out of the woods, out of my way. Yeah. Yeah. No, the Forest Service, we do a lot of work for them in soils. They send us all over the country doing soil disturbance assessments. So our job is to go in, assess the damage that's already been done in previous harvests, quantify what we think is going to happen in the future by their plans, and then try to define the resiliency of that site, which is very difficult. And so we try to draw the line of where the threshold is before they go over it and the land looks like Afghanistan.
You know, there's been a lot of work on fungus to bacteria ratio counts and so on.
Yep.
Can you speak to that?
I haven't done any reading or research into that, but it is a cool thing. The two main biological drivers are fungi and bacteria, and it's different ratios in prairies and in forests. In a grassland, it's more bacteria, and in a forest, it's more fungal. That's as far as I know on that stuff. You probably know a whole lot more than I do.
Just the more fungi you have per bacteria, the better off you are. Really, that's almost
Yeah.
a golden rule.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Mark, could you speak about the role of understory regeneration when you're talking about this? You talked about all the way up to, slash and scatter.
Yeah.
After a thinning operation or something. What happens next? What are the key things to look for or to encourage?
After you do the lop and scatter stuff?
Yeah, in terms of what grows first.
Well,
the succession is
hopefully, after you do a lop and scatter, it's not so thick that things don't come up. But in a really good restoration job, the full complement of trees should be there already. So you're actually not looking for more regen. Whenever you hear the Forest Service say, oh, we got to open this up for regen, and there's all kinds of regen there, by regen, I'm talking trees this big. That's regen. They think of little twigs. That's kind of how that goes. Be really careful when you hear that they need to open it up for regen, because very few forests need that.
What about brush, forbs?
Yeah,
like that?
you will see, after thinning, the shrubs jump, usually due to, more sunlight. But in this state, not so much, because the deer have a much bigger impact on things than anything else. The ecologic trends in this state are completely backwards in a forest setting because of too many damn deer. Yeah, and if you guys really want something interesting, if you've got a piece of land, put up an exclosure. Everybody should have an exclosure on their property to keep deer out. Just a small patch, 20 by 20, and you will be shocked.
Ask Rick.
Yeah, Rick.
Yeah, I was just going to speak to that. It's like we have 40 acres up next to Lubrick, and it had one time had a big aspen grove on it that died, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. So there's carcasses everywhere. So the roots are still there, and it's all one organism, right? So once we got there and started being active on the land and started working the land, it started keeping the deer moving a little bit. And I noticed one little aspen tree about this big was starting to come back to life again. And then I was thinning in that area. I wove together these big panels and then created an exclosure. That thing in 2 years filled. It literally filled up from that one tree. Once it got going, and once the deer were away from that, it filled that whole space full of aspens. It's just a thick mass of aspens now. And now they're sneaking out all over the place. And, we had 3 dogs up there this year, so that really kept the deer moving. So.
That is
a permaculture used for dogs.
Yeah, but that kind of, the use of slash for that reason is incredible. We use it all the time on our stream restoration projects. We've actually almost restored the physical integrity of streams just by throwing slash down in appropriate places. And just like you do, what we do is we find places where there's cottonwood regen. It might be this tall, but it's 20 years old because it just keeps getting nibbled and nibbled and nibbled. So we do a nearby thinning project, jack straw slash in there, rather deep. If you don't want to walk in there, the deer don't want to walk in there. So just like you're saying, they just pop right up and there you go. Yeah, they're lazy. Yeah, just like this. Yeah.
I have an urban forestry question, I guess, sort of. So I live in town and I have my little double lot, and I'm using permaculture principles to work on the small area that I have. And, you know, our front yard sheet mulch, we have like food shrubs and trees growing there, and comfrey and what have you, and I'm trying to do the right thing. And we have some trees we're going to take out, and I was talking to the young woman who's going to come and remove the trees for us, and I was like, well, can I just chip it and use it, like, since it's here, and, you know, the idea of, like, use what you have. And she was like, no, you have to take it out for disease, and, you know, you shouldn't do that. And so I'm just wondering, like, in the urban setting, your perspective on that, does it depend on the type of tree?
Sure
I'm sure it
does.
does, yeah.
Yeah. So for example, if you're working in an orchard setting, you don't take your orchard slash and put it under your tree, because the same decomposition process that hit that slash will hit the tree.
Gotcha.
But in your yard, if you're taking down a maple tree and there's no other maples around, don't worry about it. Yeah, you can use that slash. You bet it. What she called diseases, we call decomposing fungi.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I was thinking. One of the trees, I can't think what it is off the top of my head, but there's nothing else like it around. And I was like, oh, that looks like it would make some nice little chips. And
Don't
she was
worry
like,
about it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
What about upholstery?
Yeah.
Once you have, have 12 inches of soil over it, doesn't it turn into a different problem? I mean, that's the wrong word, different scenario.
Yeah, it might. Different fungi for sure. Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, doing some of that, with some of it, yeah.
But it is important for fruit trees.
Right.
Yeah, don't
Different.
do it for fruit trees. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process for road reclamation. We've got some areas there where you've been there that are highly compacted for quite a few years and looking at taking some sections out, or even just taking it down to a true track from a full road. What your process is.
Yeah. He's asking about road obliteration work. We do quite a bit of that, and it's some of the most satisfying work around to make a road go away. But what you're really trying to do is restore the hydrologic processes on a slope. That's the big key. So here's something that people don't understand about roads. Do you think this board works? You folks who do terracing and whatnot, this is why terraces work. This is something you're going to want to know about soil. Okay, here you go. Slope, cut slope, road, fill slope. It's all done here. When you have a road like this, and the water is going down here, what it does, it goes underground, blah, blah, blah. And it's moving by two forces, gravity and then capillary action, like a straw. So it's getting whipped through the soil. And that's the process we're talking about right now. So, goes through here, gravitational water will hit this and pour out. But most of the water, the capillary action water, the capillary water, it gets dammed up behind here. It stops. It can't go anywhere. You've just screwed up the hydrologic cycle. So whenever you start to do terracing and whatnot and all this permaculture techniques, it has big ramifications on a landscape scale. Probably not on your several acres, but it's something to keep in mind. You're actually damming water using air. I call these air dams. Yeah. And now what happens is, in a really wet year, this gets saturated, really saturated. And then it fails. It slumps down and then just keeps going down. So that's why road failures cause landslides. It's actually because they hold water back. Isn't that weird? Yeah, too much water in the soil. And I didn't believe this for the longest time. And so I started doing soil moisture measurements above and below roads. My God, it's true. Yeah. I always have to see everything for myself. So I went out there and dug holes and actually dried the soil out. My God, it's got 3 times as much water as it should have, as anywhere else.
So what strategies do you use?
Well, to obliterate these kind of roads, we like full contour, recontour. So we take the fill and we actually put it back in here. And then you've got problems about reconnecting the hydrology, big problems. To get this water to go through, it takes years. It will happen, but it takes years. Sometimes we chunk a log in there to create underground channels, things like that. And then the big thing is you're going to want to veg it. If you're lucky and you find the old topsoil, you can put it back up there. But if you're not lucky, what you've got up here is a kind of a dead subsoil that you want things to grow in. Not that easy. So what we do, we put it in here, We take the excavator and we reach up into the woods and steal litter and duff and all the inoculant that's up there and all the seed source. Litter and duff is a heck of a seed bank. So we take that with the big yellow machine and sprinkle it around on the road base. And that not only inoculates it, it puts a seed source in there, gives a little bit of shade as well. And that technique really, really works. But it only works in places with about 25 inches of rain or more. You try to do it in dry country, you just it blows away. So it's different techniques for different places. Did I answer all your road questions? Or?
Well, what do you, besides, if you're not actually recontouring the whole thing, just for breaking up the compaction,
Yeah,
how
so
deep are you normally seeing compaction in there? I mean, extreme compaction.
Heavily used road like at your place, you're going to want to take it out to 2 or 3 feet. And that's how far we decompact with an excavator.
2 to 3 feet and then revegetate it from there?
Yep.
Okay.
We kind of fluff it up, lift it up and drop it. Yeah.
Get yourself an excavator.
I'd like to change the reason and ask about fungi in your forest ecosystems that you're observing, and whether or not you're seeing. I've always been curious about fungal succession. So can you speak a little bit about fungal succession?
Holy smokes, that's a tough one. You know, the fungi world is really complex, and I'm not a fungi guy really. I just use them. There's people who know a whole lot more about it than me, a whole lot more. But you do see different things in different states of decomposition. For example, when a stick first falls on the ground, it'll get hit by what we call a white rotter. And white rots eat cellulose and lignin. They eat up the whole tree.
No, lignin.
What's
White
that?
rot eats lignin.
Yeah, white rot eats both. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's the brown rotters who come in, and they can come in at the very same time, and they only eat cellulose, and they leave the lignin behind. Now, what's a critter in the woods going to do with a pile of lignin? Nothing. So when you're out there in the woods and you see these long masses of brown cuticle rot, that's the lignin byproduct, and that stuff is super important. And that's how we actually, it's one of the factors we use to gauge the ecologic integrity of a site, is how much of that is around. Yeah. So to talk about the succession, it happens more individually on a piece of wood, not in an ecosystem. In a mature forest, there's things going on all the time, different things every single place. It's really, really complicated.
You have also your secondary saprophyte. Your saprophyte is fungus that eats dead things. And so you'll have your primaries, which will be your white rots and your brown rots, but then you'll have 2 or 3 other fungi that come along and live off the enzyme mode and the leftover substrate is what we call it. And you'll have up to like a succession of 4 different fungi moving through there.
And then along with that, you get all kinds of critters. For example, the soil mites is what we use for is kind of a gauge. And we test the underground ecosystem health by seeing different populations and where they are. And it's really fun. Yeah.
We have caliche. I've never heard of that until I came over here.
Oh.
Is it a calcium carbonate? And how does it interact with the soil?
I don't know much about that. I know it's
Okay.
a clay type, but I don't know much about it.
It's supposedly Native Americans' term for.
It's a calcium carbonate.
Probably
it's just a bitch to dig in. I know that. We tried to. It's really.
You have to
compacted.
use a jackhammer.
Yeah, jackhammer, heavy equipment.
Okay.
But
Makes me cough.
Right.
you can mix that with organic matter.
Oh, it makes me cough. Okay, I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah.
I have a lot of it. I'll start a business. Okay.
Ah.
I can supply it and let it grow. Yeah, okay, awesome.
It's probably a Native American word for bad dirt.
Well, it's something about dog shit.
Exactly.
It's got to do with dog shit, but I don't want
Yeah. Yeah. But you can actually soften that stuff up with biologic activity. You know,
Right.
make those water stable aggregates. You can take a solid clay, and aggregate it to where it acts like a sandy clay loam. So you can, a solid clay will act like a sandy clay loam if you do it right.
So longer, deeper watering cycles too to help break that up, because you're essentially getting a hard pan that results from the mineralized water that you're using to water. So, I mean, it's forming because of the calcium carbonates are coming out of solution at a particular point in their, as they percolate through
Right.
the soil.
Yeah.
So, in part it results that's where the water stops moving, especially if it's been applied, been irrigated.
So it's like a hard pan precipitate hard
It's a
pan.
hard pan that results from precipitation and has the mineral content of the water that
Sounds like I'm glad we don't have that. All right, I think that's about it. I'll be around if you have further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.